You don't always know the moment someone starts following you. Sometimes it's just a feeling. Footsteps that slow when you slow, a car that never passes, a presence that disappears the second you turn around. And by the time you realize it isn't coincidence anymore, it's already been happening for a while. Tonight's video features 3 scary true being followed horror stories. Real accounts verified through public records and witness statements. Names have been changed to protect privacy. But every event you're about to hear happened exactly as described. Before we continue, tap like. It helps the story reach more horror lovers just like you. And comment where you're watching from. You're part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's listening tonight. As you listen, let me know which story hit you the hardest. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Your support fuels this channel and helps bring you even more true, unsettling stories that refuse to let go. Now, pay attention. Some of these stories don't end when the footsteps stop. I work second shift at a distribution warehouse outside a dying Appalachian town. Most people only know from exit signs. By the time I clock out, it's always past midnight. The parking lot lights hum like insects, and the mountains around the valley swallow sound in a way that makes even small noises feel intentional. I noticed the footsteps on my walk home. At first, it was just the rhythm. Mine, then another pair behind me. Not close enough to feel breath, not far enough to ignore. When I stopped to adjust my jacket, the footsteps stopped too. I stood there, listening to the low wind sliding through the trees, the smell of wet asphalt and old leaves clinging to the air. After a few seconds, I convinced myself I'd imagined it and kept walking. The apartment I lived in sat above an abandoned hardware store on Main Street. The building leaned slightly forward, like it had given up resisting gravity years ago. Inside, everything smelled faintly of mold and cold metal. I locked the door behind me that night and didn't think much more about the footsteps. Until the next evening, I saw him across the street as I stepped out of the grocery store. He was sitting in a dark sedan with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. He wasn't looking at me directly, just forward, unmoving. The parking lot lights reflected off the windshield, making his face hard to read. When another customer walked past me pushing a cart, I glanced back at the car. It was gone. Over the next week, he appeared in pieces of my routine like something that had memorized my habits. Standing under a flickering streetlight, halfway down my walk home. Parked at the far end of the lot when I left work. Across the street from my apartment, always just far enough away that confronting him would feel unreasonable. He never followed me when anyone else was around. If a coworker walked beside me for even a block, the feeling disappeared. If a car drove past or someone stepped out of a bar, the space behind me felt empty again. But when I was alone, truly alone, the air shifted. My shoulders tightened, my ears strained for sound. Once, I stopped abruptly and turned around. He was there, standing too still at the edge of a church parking lot, hands in his coat pockets. His face looked ordinary, in a way that unsettled me more than anything sharp or threatening. No expression, no hurry, just watching, like he had nowhere else to be. I went inside my apartment and locked the door, then checked the windows, even though they were too high for anyone to reach. That night, I slept with the lights on. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence, and every creak of the building settling sounded like movement in the hall. A few days later, I found something off inside my apartment. It was small, almost nothing. A chair in the corner, angled slightly differently than I remembered. A faint smell, damp wool maybe, lingering near the door. I stood there longer than necessary, trying to decide if I was inventing reasons to be afraid. In a drawer I rarely used, I found an old photo that didn't belong to me. It showed the front of my building decades ago. The hardware store sign still intact. A man stood on the sidewalk, half turned toward the camera. The photo was faded, but the posture felt familiar. I put the photo back where I found it and didn't tell anyone. I didn't know how to explain that nothing had happened, yet everything felt wrong. The footsteps returned that night. They followed me halfway home, stopping when I stopped, starting when I did. When I reached my building, I didn't turn around. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and went inside, heart beating hard enough to hurt. From my apartment window, I watched the empty street below. Across the road, under the broken streetlight, someone stood just out of the light's reach. I blinked, and he was gone. I slept poorly, caught between dreams and listening. By morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening wasn't beginning. It was continuing. And somehow, I was the only one who noticed. I started changing my routine, hoping it would break whatever pattern had formed. Different routes home, different grocery store, leaving work early or late. It didn't matter. When I was alone, he found the empty spaces between people. The fear didn't spike. It sank in, became something I carried. My body stayed tense, even in daylight, like it had learned a lesson my mind hadn't caught up to yet. One night, rain started just as I left work. It soaked through my jacket fast, turning the roads into mirrors that bent the town's few lights into long, distorted streaks. Halfway home, I heard the footsteps again. Slower this time. Careful. I ducked into an old service road that cut behind the abandoned rail depot. Mud sucked at my boots. The smell of rot and wet wood hung heavy in the air. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I didn't slow down. That was when I noticed something ahead of me. A small cabin set back from the road, half hidden by trees. I had passed that way dozens of times and never seen it. The roof sagged. The windows were dark. The door stood slightly open, like it had been left in a hurry. I don't know why I went inside. Curiosity maybe, or the need to not be out in the open. The cabin smelled of old water and mildew. The floorboards creaked softly under my weight. Inside, there wasn't much. Just a table, a cot, and a shelf lined with notebooks. The air felt heavy, as if it hadn't moved in years. I flipped one notebook open. Dates filled the pages, times, street names, notes, written in cramped handwriting, observations about routines, about me, my work hours, the nights I took longer to get home, the days I was sick and stayed inside. My hands shook as I turned the pages. There were sketches too, rough outlines of my apartment building, the street light across from it, the grocery store parking lot. At the back of the notebook, a single sentence repeated over and over in different ink. Only when alone. I backed out of the cabin slowly, heart pounding, rain soaking my hair and clothes. The woods around me was silent, except for the rain hitting leaves and mud. I didn't hear footsteps this time. When I reached my apartment, the door was unlocked. Nothing inside looked disturbed, but the air felt wrong, stale, like someone else's presence hadn't fully left. On my kitchen table sat another notebook. This one newer. Clean pages, Except for the first, you noticed. I didn't call the police. I couldn't explain how someone had been following me without ever being seen by anyone else, without ever touching me, without leaving fingerprints I could point to. I moved out 2 days later. I live in a different town now. Different job, different hours. I don't walk home anymore. I don't linger alone in parking lots or quiet streets. Still, sometimes, when I'm the only person on a sidewalk, or when rain dulls the world into something smaller, I feel it. The subtle shift in the air. The awareness of space behind me. I've never seen him again. But I've learned something I can't forget. Some people don't follow to reach you. They follow to be near. And once you realize you're being watched only when you're alone, being alone never feels the same again. I've lived my whole life in a small Appalachian town, tucked between two ridges that never quite let the sun settle in. People here recognize your truck before they recognize your face. If someone new passes through, word spreads before nightfall. That's why I noticed the car. I worked late shifts at a feed supply store just outside town, closing up after dark most nights. The drive home followed the same winding roads I'd driven since I was 16. Narrow pavement, no shoulder, forest pressing in close on both sides. Fog liked to settle low in the hollows, especially after rain, thick enough to blur the road into something dreamlike. The first night I saw the car, I didn't think much of it. Headlights appeared behind me as I turned onto County Route 6. That road snakes through woods and old properties no one's lived in for decades. The car kept a steady distance, didn't rush, didn't fall back. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, it stayed just far enough away to feel intentional. I told myself it was coincidence, maybe someone heading the same way. But then I took a turn that made no sense. I turned onto an unmarked gravel road that dead-ended near an abandoned sawmill. I'd driven it maybe twice in my life. The car followed. Gravel popped under both our tires, loud in the silence. I pulled over near the mill, heart tapping against my ribs, and turned off my engine. The headlights behind me stayed on. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, smelling damp leaves and rust, listening to my own breathing. After a long minute, the car reversed slowly and disappeared back down the road without a sound. No horn, no window rolling down, nothing. At home, I parked in my driveway and stood for a moment before going inside, scanning the tree line. My house was old. My grandparents had built it themselves. The porch sagged in the middle. The screen door stuck unless you lifted it just right. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of wood rot and dust, no matter how much I cleaned. That night, I double-checked the locks. Over the next week, the car appeared again and again. Different nights, different roads, always after dark, always keeping the same careful distance. I started taking routes no one else used, back roads that looped through forgotten parts of the valley, past collapsing barns and empty trailers swallowed by weeds. The car followed every turn. No one else ever seemed to notice it. If another vehicle passed, the car would fall back just enough to blend in, then reappear once I was alone again. The restraint bothered me more than aggression would have. Whoever it was didn't want to be seen. They wanted to stay with me. One night, I noticed something strange inside my house. Mud tracked across the porch, faint but fresh. I told myself it was mine from earlier in the day. Still, the smell lingered, wet earth, sharp and heavy. In my bedroom, the curtain had shifted, pulled back just enough to expose the window. I hadn't done that. I stood there longer than necessary, listening. The house creaked softly as it always did, settling into itself. No voices, no footsteps. Just the sound of the wind pressing against the siding. Later, while looking for a flashlight in a drawer I rarely used, I found an old photo tucked beneath some papers. It showed my house decades ago, before the trees grew so tall. A car sat across the road in the picture, dark and indistinct. I didn't remember owning that photo. That night, as I lay in bed, headlights washed briefly across my bedroom wall. An engine idled somewhere outside. I waited for it to leave. Eventually, it did. Or maybe it never shut off at all. I slept poorly, waking at every sound. The sense of being watched pressing in on me like the fog in the valley. By morning, the unease hadn't faded. It had settled. Something was wrong. And whatever it was, it knew where I lived. The night the car finally stopped following me was the night it stopped moving at all. Rain fell hard as I drove home from work, turning the road into a ribbon of black glass. The car appeared behind me just after the last street light, its headlights dull through the mist. I didn't bother changing routes anymore. I just wanted to get home. When I turned into my driveway, the car slowed and pulled to a stop across the road. The engine stayed running, the headlights stayed off, just a dark shape idling in the rain. I went inside without looking back. Sleep didn't come. The sound of the rain mixed with the low hum of an engine that never seemed to fade. Sometime near dawn, I must have drifted off. In the morning, the car was gone. What wasn't gone were the footprints. They came from the road, cutting through the wet grass, heavy and deliberate. Mud caked deep in the tread. They stopped directly beneath my bedroom window. The ground there was churned, as if someone had stood for a long time. I felt cold, even though the air was warm. I followed the prints around the side of the house. They circled once, then returned the way they came. No broken window, no forced door. Just evidence of presence, of patience. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I drove to the county records office in the next town over. I don't know what I expected to find. Only that sitting still felt worse. The clerk was old enough to remember everything. When I mentioned the stretch of road across from my house, she paused, asked me who I was related to. When I told her my last name, her mouth tightened just a little. She pulled a file. Years ago, before I was born, a man had lived across the road. Kept to himself, worked odd jobs. People said he watched the town more than he lived in it. When my grandparents built the house, he complained. Said they'd taken something from him. No one paid attention. He died alone. His property rotted away until the trees swallowed it. No mention of a car, no mention of trouble. That night, I packed a bag and stayed with a friend across the county line. For weeks afterward, every set of headlights behind me made my stomach drop. Every idle engine sounded too close. I sold the house 6 months later. Sometimes, driving unfamiliar roads at night, I still catch myself checking the rearview mirror, watching for headlights that keep just the right distance. I don't know who was in that car. I don't know what they wanted. What I do know is this: being followed isn't always about being caught. Sometimes it's about being known. And once someone learns how to stay just close enough, you never really feel alone again. I moved into the apartment because it was cheap and close to the clinic where I worked nights. The building used to be a textile mill before the town dried up. long before tourists discovered the mountains again and called the decay rustic. It sat at the edge of a hollow outside Boone Fork, pressed between a creek and a steep tree-choked slope. Fog settled there almost every evening, seeping into the parking lot and clinging to the brick like breath on cold glass. The landlord warned me the place was old. He didn't mention the stairwell. My unit was on the 3rd floor. The stairs were narrow, concrete worn smooth in the center from decades of use. The walls sweated in summer and smelled faintly of mold and iron. At night, only every other bulb worked, leaving long stretches in shadow. Sound behaved strangely there. Footsteps echoed too much, then not at all. The first time I heard the breathing, I thought it was my own. I was coming home after a late shift, rain still dripping from my jacket. As I climbed, I noticed a soft, steady inhale behind me. Slow, measured. It matched my steps exactly. Pause when I paused, rise when I lifted my foot. When I stopped on the landing and turned around, the stairwell was empty. Just wet concrete, rusted railing, and the distant sound of the creek. I stood there longer than I should have, listening. Nothing. It happened again 2 nights later. Same spot, same sound. This time I felt it in my shoulders before I heard it. A tightening, like my body recognized something my brain refused to name. When I turned, there was no one there. No doors opening, no footsteps retreating. I told myself it was the building settling. Old pipes, air moving through gaps in the walls. Still, I started counting my steps. Small things began to feel wrong inside the apartment. The smell shifted, sometimes damp wood, sometimes something sour, like wet clothes left too long. A chair I never used was angled toward the door. The deadbolt felt warmer than it should when I touched it, though I knew that meant nothing. In a storage closet off the hall, I found a box that wasn't mine. Inside were old maintenance logs and a black and white photo of the building before renovation. The stairwell was visible through a broken window. A man stood halfway up the stairs, blurred, his face turned away from the camera. I assumed it had belonged to a previous tenant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been placed there recently. The breathing followed me most nights after that. Always late. Always when I was alone. Never during the day. Never when I came home with groceries or spoke to someone in the parking lot. One evening, I noticed the sound stopped when I reached my floor, but resumed when I started walking again down the hall. That was new. That was wrong. I slept lightly, waking at every creak of the building. Once, I thought I heard movement outside my door, slow and careful, but when I checked, the hallway was empty. The next night, I decided to stop. Halfway up the stairs, the breathing started again. I took 2 more steps, then froze. My foot hung in the air, calf burning. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound ever had. I waited until my muscles shook. Nothing resumed. When I finally moved, the sound didn't come back. I went upstairs and locked my door. Heart pounding, knowing I hadn't proven anything. Only that whatever it was responded to me. That night I dreamed of stairwells that never ended. In the morning, I asked the landlord about the building's security cameras. He hesitated before telling me there was one covering the stairwell, installed after an incident years back. He didn't elaborate. That evening, as fog rolled in thick enough to swallow the parking lot, I realized I didn't want answers anymore, but I needed them. The breathing didn't return for 2 days after I stopped on the stairs. The absence unsettled me more than the sound ever had. I moved through my routines carefully, listening too hard, noticing too much. Every scrape of a shoe, every cough from another apartment set my nerves on edge. On the third night, it came back. Same rhythm, same distance. I didn't turn around this time. I climbed faster, pulse loud in my ears, keys biting into my palm. When I reached my floor, the sound faded again, as if it had reached some invisible boundary. I slept with the lights on and decided the next day to ask for the footage. The landlord let me use the monitor in his office, a cramped room that smelled of old paper and damp carpet. The footage was grainy, black and white. The stairwell camera faced downward from the third-floor landing, catching most of the stairs, but leaving blind spots along the wall. We fast-forwarded to the previous night. There I was, climbing, alone. I leaned closer to the screen, breath shallow. The image jittered as I moved up the steps. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then I noticed it. A second pattern of movement. Not a person, not a shadow. Just the subtle compression of dust on the steps behind me. Footprints forming where no body appeared. Each one landing just after mine, perfectly spaced, stopping when I stopped. My throat tightened. The landlord squinted, said something about camera glitches and compression artifacts. I nodded, though my hands were numb. We watched it again, and again. At one point, as I paused on the landing, the footprints halted mid-step. I asked to check earlier nights. The same thing appeared, always behind me, never overlapping, never visible beyond the disturbance they caused. I left without saying much. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove the back roads, through misty valleys and past shuttered houses slumped into the hills. Animal sounds carried far in the damp air. Owls, something heavier, moving through brush. I parked near the creek and sat there until the sky lightened. When I finally returned to the apartment, the stairwell was quiet. Inside, I noticed something else I'd missed before. The door to the storage closet stood open. Inside, the box was gone. In its place lay a notebook, damp around the edges. Inside were dates and times. Notes about shift changes, about when the building was quietest, about the stairwell lights. One line, written again and again in the margins, made my stomach turn. Stay close. Don't be seen. I moved out a week later. Didn't argue about the lease. Didn't ask questions. The landlord didn't try to stop me. I live on the ground floor now, in a different town, closer to the ridgeline. Still Appalachia, still quiet. I take the stairs when I have to, but I listen differently now. I don't turn around when I feel space behind me. Sometimes, when I climb alone, I swear I hear it, slow breathing, matching my pace, and I keep going, because stopping feels worse.
If today's story touched a quiet corner of your heart, if for a moment you felt like someone was standing close to you, then remember you are not alone. To hear more terrifying whisper in the depth of the night, subscribe to our channel Night Mare Whisper, because every story is not just about fear, it leaves behind a feeling. Thanks for watching, and one more thing, we'll meet again tomorrow night when the darkness has grown a little deeper.